The war for American independence was not decided only on land. From the very beginning, control of the sea shaped every campaign, every march, every hope of victory or fear of defeat. Great Britain entered the conflict with the most powerful navy on earth, hundreds of warships, thousands of experienced sailors, dockyards that could repair or build vessels faster than any rival. The Americans had nothing, no ships of the line, no frigates, no admiralty, no tradition of blue water fighting. What they did have was a long, vulnerable coastline, deep rivers that invited invasion, and a stubborn determination to survive. Before 1775, the colonies had relied entirely on the Royal Navy for protection. The merchants of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia sailed under British convoys. The fishermen of Marblehead and Gloucester knew the Grand Banks because British warships kept French privateers at bay. When the shooting started at Lexington, that protection vanished overnight. British squadrons could appear without warning, shell coastal towns, land raiding parties, seize supplies, and vanish again. General Washington quickly learned he could not hold New York without naval superiority. When the British fleet sailed into the harbor in the summer of 1776 with 30 warships and 400 transports, the city was lost before a shot was fired on land. The same lesson repeated at Philadelphia until Admiral Howe's brother secured the Delaware. The British Army could not rest easy. At Yorktown in 1781, it was the momentary loss of naval control to Grass's French fleet blocking Chesapeake Bay that sealed Cornwallis's fate. Without a navy, the Continental Army was forever on the defensive, forever reacting, forever one storm or one calm tide away from disaster. Congress understood the problem early. In the fall of 1775, it created a small naval committee and authorized the fitting out of 2 armed vessels. By March 1776, the first Continental Fleet, 13 small ships under Essex Hopkins, sailed from Delaware Bay. They captured New Providence in the Bahamas, seizing badly needed powder, but accomplished little else. The fleet soon dissolved. Ships were lost, captains quarreled over rank, crews deserted for better pay on privateers. The Continental Navy never grew beyond about 50 vessels at its peak. Most of them converted merchantmen or small sloops mounting 20 guns or fewer. Against Britain's hundreds of warships, it was like a skiff challenging a fleet. Privateering filled the gap. Congress and the states issued letters of marque by the thousands. Any owner who could arm a fast schooner or brig could go hunting. The profits were enormous when a prize was taken. British merchantmen loaded with rum, sugar, linen, hardware. The risks were just as high. Capture meant prison ships in New York Harbor where men died by the hundreds of fever and starvation. Yet thousands of Americans turned privateer. They ranged from the Caribbean to the Irish Sea, even into the English Channel. In 1777, the Massachusetts privateer Rattlesnake alone took 20 prizes. The cumulative effect was staggering. British merchants lost millions in cargo, insurance rates soared, trade between Britain and the West Indies slowed to a crawl. The Royal Navy was forced to divert warships to convoy duty, weakening its strength in American waters. Individual captains became legends. John Paul Jones, a young Scots-born sailor who had settled in Virginia, took command of the sloop Providence in 1776 and raided Nova Scotia. In 1779, sailing the French-built Bonhomme Richard under his Stars and Stripes flag, he met the British frigate Serapis off Flamborough Head. The battle lasted 4 hours. Bonhomme Richard was riddled, on fire, sinking. Jones lashed his ship to Serapis and fought yardarm to yardarm. When the British captain demanded surrender, Jones shouted back his immortal reply, "I have not yet begun to fight." In the end, Serapis struck her colors. Jones sailed her into port as a prize while Bonhomme Richard sank beneath him. The victory electrified Europe and proved that Americans could challenge Britain on her own seas. Yet individual heroics could not compensate for the lack of a real fleet. In 1778, France entered the war openly, bringing 40 ships of the line and experienced admirals. Admiral d'Estaing's squadron arrived at Delaware Bay in July. Too late to trap Howe in Philadelphia, but in time to force the British evacuation. D'Estaing followed to New York, then to Newport, hoping to combine with American land forces. A violent gale scattered his ships. Several were dismasted. The operation collapsed. D'Estaing sailed for the West Indies, leaving the Americans bitter and suspicious. In Boston, French sailors brawled with locals. Newspapers complained of allies who fought only when it suited France. The pattern repeated. French fleets came and went Gitchen, de Grasse, Barras, each time promising joint operations that dissolved because of weather, conflicting orders from Versailles, or the overriding French priority to protect sugar islands in the Caribbean. Yet even these partial alliances hurt Britain. Every French sail in American waters forced London to send more ships across the Atlantic, thinning the home fleet and exposing British trade to privateers and enemy cruisers. By 1781, the naval war reached its climax. Cornwallis had marched into Virginia, hoping to establish a naval base at Yorktown or Portsmouth. Washington and Rochambeau slipped south in secret. Admiral de Grasse sailed from the West Indies with 28 ships of the line, more than the entire British fleet then in North American waters. On September 5, 1781, off the Virginia Capes, de Grasse met Admiral Thomas Graves. The British had 19 ships to de Grasse's 24. The fleets maneuvered cautiously, exchanged broadsides, then broke off. Graves retreated to New York for repairs. De Grasse held the bay. When Admiral Hood arrived with reinforcements, the combined British force still hesitated. By then, Washington's and Rochambeau's armies had Cornwallis surrounded on land. The siege guns opened. On October 19, Cornwallis surrendered. That single afternoon off the Capes decided the war. Britain had lost command of the sea at the decisive moment. Without it, Cornwallis could not be supplied or evacuated. The army that had marched triumphantly through the Carolinas was trapped and forced to capitulate. Peace followed slowly. In Paris, the negotiators argued for 2 years. Britain, exhausted, facing enemies on 4 continents, finally recognized American independence, and the treaty gave the new nation generous boundaries to the Mississippi, to the Great Lakes, far more than the wartime map might have justified. Looking back, the naval war revealed a painful truth. The Americans could never have won without French help at sea. Yet they paid dearly for that help in pride, in patience, in the constant fear that their ally might abandon them for Caribbean sugar or European balance of power politics. The Continental Navy remained small to the end. Its greatest captains, Jones, Barry, Nicholson, scattered across borrowed or captured ships. Privateers did the heavy lifting, bleeding British commerce until London wearied of the cost. The deeper lesson was strategic. Sea power is more than warships. It is the ability to move armies, protect trade, deny the enemy the same. Britain had it in abundance and still lost. Why? Because she faced a determined people who refused to surrender, privateers who made every voyage a gamble, and decisively France, Spain, and Holland, who turned a colonial rebellion into a world war. When the last British transport sailed from New York in 1783, the guns were silent. The new nation stood on its own coast, free but vulnerable. The founders knew the lesson of the sea would have to be learned again. They built no great navy. In the 1780s, money was too scarce, politics too divided. Yet they never forgot. Without command of the waters that washed their shores, independence was only a paper promise. The revolution ended not with a bang of cannon on land, but with the quiet splash of anchors in Chesapeake Bay and the slow fade of British topsails over the horizon. Sea power had let the British come. Sea power, Allied and American, had finally forced them to leave. And in that departure, a new nation drew its first secure breath, facing the open Atlantic not as colonies, but as a sovereign power ready, in time, to build a navy worthy of its destiny.